Have you ever felt that strange emptiness at the end of the year? Even with parties, gifts, and people around? It feels like something is missing. It's as if the world around you is celebrating. But inside, there's a silence you can't quite explain. A silence that doesn't break, not even with fireworks. For many, the end of the year is synonymous with joy and celebration. But for others, it carries a feeling of heaviness, longing, and an undefined sensation that presses on the chest. It's not just sadness. It's a denser feeling, almost like a fog that wraps around memories of what was, expectations of what didn't happen, and the promises that went unfulfilled. While everyone is posting their year's achievements on social media, some people catch themselves thinking, what did I really do? Was it enough? And this kind of reflection can turn into a melancholy that's hard to name, but one that many people know all too well. But after all, what is this end-of-year melancholy? Where does it come from? Why does it show up so strongly at this specific time of year? The answer to this might be closer than we think. Carl Jung, with his concept of the shadow, and Sigmund Freud, with the idea of symbolic mourning, offer some insight into this feeling we often prefer not to confront. In this video, we're going to explore together what's behind this sensation, that, even if it's not spoken aloud, is shared by many of us. We'll try to understand why. While some people celebrate, others revisit their shadows. We'll talk about the pain of leaving the year behind, about the parts of ourselves we avoid facing, and most importantly, about what we can do to deal with it in a lighter, healthier way. Maybe what you're feeling right now isn't sadness, but a calling to look at what was left behind and at the parts of yourself that are still asking for attention. And accepting this call might be the first step to stepping into the new year, feeling more whole and at peace. The end-of-year melancholy isn't just sadness. It's a more complex, deeper feeling that's hard to name. If sadness has a clear cause, like the loss of someone or something, melancholy is more like an emptiness that appears without warning, but makes its presence known in every corner of the mind. It's not exactly pain, but a sense of absence, of something that should be there but isn't. It's the weight of everything. We can't quite explain with words. And why does it hit so hard at the end of the year? It's because this period symbolizes the closing of a cycle. Throughout the year, we stay busy with our routines, tasks, and commitments. But as the end of the year approaches, we are invited, or forced, to look back. It's as if the entire year flashes before our eyes in a kind of mental replay, bringing to the surface the achievements, the failures, and especially the things that were left unfinished. This review of the year works like a mirror, and in that mirror, what's reflected is not just what was done, but also what was postponed, the plans that were put off, and the expectations that didn't come true. It's at this moment that some people begin to ask themselves, did I do enough? What did I let slip by? Where did I go wrong? These questions may seem simple, but they have the power to stir up everything that's been tucked away in the drawers of our minds, the ones we spend the entire year trying not to open. In addition to all this, there's social pressure. While social media fills up with photos of achievements, parties, and celebrations, the feeling of comparison intensifies. Those who don't feel fully happy, successful, or fulfilled tend to look at themselves more critically. The logic is cruel. If everyone is celebrating and I'm not, then I must be the problem. But this comparison overlooks the fact that what we see on social media is just a showcase, not the entire store. However, this melancholy doesn't arise only from what was experienced. Often, it comes from what wasn't. It's the weight of unfulfilled promises, who hasn't made a goal list at the beginning of the year, and, come December, realized that almost nothing was checked off. Changing jobs, taking care of mental health, improving family relationships. The desires that were postponed turn into internal pressures. It's at this moment that the thought, I could have done more, becomes a kind of mantra, repeated in silence. But end-of-year melancholy also has a quiet, nostalgic side. It's like that feeling of longing that appears without knowing exactly for what. For some, it's the smell of Christmas dinner that reminds them of people who are no longer present. For others, it's the sound of a song that brings back a childhood memory. Moments like these stir up a sense of lost time, as if happy memories are becoming more distant with each passing year. If sadness can be seen as a scream, melancholy is more like a constant whisper. It doesn't demand attention, but it's always there, present in the background of every thought. At the end of the year, when the world around us seems louder, melancholy becomes even more noticeable, precisely because the inner silence stands in sharp contrast. But why does this happen? Why, at this specific time of year, are we overtaken by this feeling of emptiness and nostalgia? To understand it, we need to look at what psychology has to say about the shadow and symbolic mourning, concepts from Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud that help shed light on what hides behind this melancholy. Carl Jung brought us an idea that, although uncomfortable, is essential to understanding what we feel at the end of the year, the concept of the shadow. For Jung, the shadow is not something external to us. On the contrary, it's a part of ourselves. Perhaps the most intimate part, that we try to avoid all year long. It forms from everything we reject or deny within ourselves. Fears, failures, insecurities, and even desires that we consider inappropriate. Throughout the year, while we're busy with deadlines, bills to pay, and daily responsibilities, it's easy to push the shadow aside. The daily grind works as a curtain that prevents us from looking at these parts of ourselves. But when the end of the year arrives and we're naturally driven to review everything that happened, that curtain opens. And there it is, our shadow, waiting to be seen. This happens because the end of the year has the power to illuminate the parts of ourselves that have been hidden. It's no surprise that, during this time, many people begin to feel discomfort or dissatisfaction that seems to have no logical explanation. As we review the year that has passed, we're forced to face our failures, unfulfilled promises, and the expectations we placed on ourselves. Suddenly, everything we avoided throughout the year stands right in front of us, like a mirror reflecting what we don't want to see, and the shadow doesn't manifest in abstract ways. It has very familiar faces. It could be the person who promised to change jobs but stayed in the same position out of fear or complacency. It could be someone who said they would improve their relationship with family but, in practice, didn't take any steps toward it. It might even be that person who achieved several external accomplishments, a new job, a house of their own, a positive image on social media, but still feels like it wasn't enough. These examples show that the shadow isn't a mystical or distant entity. It's the side of us that confronts us when the mask we wear for the world can no longer hold up. When we force ourselves to appear fine to others throughout the year, the shadow stays hidden. But during the end-of-year reflection, when the filters fall away, it reveals itself. So, what does Jung teach us about this? That the shadow should not be fought, but integrated. In other words, instead of trying to silence the shadow, we need to listen to it. Contrary to popular belief, the shadow is not our enemy. It is, in fact, a part of us that wants to be seen. And often, what it reveals is a call for attention. Jung's famous phrase sums it up perfectly. What you resist, persists. This means that the more you try to suppress your insecurities, regrets, and failures, the stronger they become. It's like trying to hold a ball underwater. At first, you can keep it submerged, but eventually, it escapes and shoots back up with even more force. The same thing happens with the shadow. But what can you do when the shadow appears at the end of the year? The first step is to stop running away. If there are regrets, failures, or unfulfilled promises, look at them without judgment. Ask yourself, what is this part of me trying to show me? If you didn't change jobs, maybe it reveals that the fear of change is still present. If you didn't resolve a relationship, maybe you're avoiding the discomfort of having an honest conversation. The shadow only becomes dangerous when we fail to recognize it. As long as it remains unconscious, it influences our choices in secret. That's why, so often, we repeat the same mistakes year after year. But when we face it head-on, control shifts back into our hands. The end of the year is an invitation to this process of integration. It's as if life itself is saying, look at who you've been and see what still needs your attention. It might be difficult, uncomfortable, and sometimes even painful. But by doing so, we take a step toward becoming a more honest and complete version of ourselves. The shadow you hide all year long reveals itself at the end of the year, and sometimes it appears in the form of melancholy, if Carl Jung helps us understand end-of-year melancholy through the concept of the shadow. Sigmund Freud offers another important key: symbolic mourning. For Freud, mourning doesn't only happen when we lose a loved one. It occurs whenever we leave something behind. Even if that something isn't a person or a physical object, losing an opportunity, ending a phase of life, or letting go of a version of ourselves are also forms of loss. The end of the year is, by nature, a large-scale collective closure of a cycle. It's not just the calendar that changes, but also our perception of time. As one year ends and another begins, we get the feeling that we're leaving behind everything we experienced. And that's where the concept of symbolic loss comes into play. We're not just turning the page of a book, we're saying goodbye to an entire chapter. Every decision we made or didn't make throughout the year comes back to our minds, and we are forced to confront it. And what about mourning? Why does Freud say that symbolic mourning is unavoidable? Because ending a cycle requires accepting that something has been left behind. Every loss, whether symbolic or real, needs a farewell ritual. This is what we do when we say goodbye to people, phases of life, and opportunities. The problem is that, at the end of the year, we don't always recognize that we're going through a process of mourning. Often this goodbye happens silently, almost invisibly, but its impact is felt in the form of melancholy. Some examples of this are quite concrete. Think of the feeling of looking back at the year that passed and realizing that important people are no longer present. Maybe a loved one has passed away, or a friendship slowly drifted apart without you noticing. In these moments, the end of the year acts as a memory trigger, bringing to the surface memories of those who were by our side and of those who, for some reason, are no longer there. The space that was once filled by these people now becomes a sort of emptiness, and according to Freud, this emptiness needs to be processed. But symbolic mourning is not limited to the absence of people. It also involves the expectations we place on ourselves. Remember that New Year's resolution list. When December comes, and we realize that some of those goals weren't achieved, we experience a sense of mourning for the idealized version of ourselves. It's as if we're saying, I expected to be a better person this year, but I couldn't make it happen. This kind of feeling shows up in familiar situations. It could be the regret of not dedicating more time to studying, the frustration of not changing jobs, or even the sense that the year went by without anything meaningful happening. It's not just sadness. It's symbolic mourning for the person we could have been but weren't. Another point Freud emphasizes is that mourning needs to be experienced. If we avoid mourning, it doesn't disappear. It shows up in other ways. It's like a wound that doesn't heal because it wasn't treated. And the end of the year is when these open wounds become more visible. This explains why, while many people are celebrating, others feel like isolating themselves, staying silent, or revisiting the past. It's not weakness or ingratitude. It's symbolic mourning in action. But Freud also points to a solution: farewell rituals. Human beings need rituals to process their losses. When a loved one dies, we hold wakes and farewell ceremonies. These rituals help the mind accept the loss, allowing the mourning process to run its course. At the end of the year, the same principle applies. Saying goodbye to the year that has passed is more than just watching the clock strike midnight. It's about accepting the losses, closing internal cycles, and creating space for something new. A farewell ritual can be simple but symbolic. Writing a letter to the year that has passed, listing achievements and regrets, and then either saving it or burning it, for example, can help give form to the mourning process. Another common practice is to list the people, situations, and versions of ourselves that we need to leave behind. It may seem simple, but symbolically, it helps close the cycle consciously instead of leaving it unfinished. When the clock strikes midnight, we're not just celebrating the new year. We're also saying goodbye to the year that has passed. And goodbyes always leave marks. But these marks don't have to be seen as scars. They can be seen as traces that remind us of who we were and who we are becoming. End-of-year melancholy doesn't present itself in an obvious way. Often, it disguises itself, appearing in quiet gestures and subtle sensations. While everyone around is smiling, toasting, and sharing their achievements on social media, some people feel the opposite, an emptiness they don't know how to fill. It's like being at a crowded party and still feeling alone. This feeling tends to manifest in different ways. One of the most common signs is the difficulty in feeling truly present during celebrations. The lights flash, the music plays, people are chatting. But inside, there's a sense of detachment. Many people are physically at the party, but mentally, they're caught in a flow of thoughts that takes them far away. Another frequent sign is the feeling of emptiness, even when surrounded by loved ones. This feeling has nothing to do with the presence or absence of people, but with internal disconnection. It's the classic feeling of not belonging, as if the people around you are moving at a different rhythm. It's at this moment that the desire to slip away arises, to retreat to a bedroom for a few minutes, or, in more intense cases, to avoid end-of-year parties altogether. Dissatisfaction is also a symptom that often arises during this period. Many people look back on the year and feel like they didn't do enough, that they could have tried harder. This manifests as constant self-criticism, a kind of inner judge that doesn't stop repeating, "You failed. You didn't meet your goals. Everyone else succeeded except for you." This dissatisfaction can become a mental cycle, where a person gets stuck in a whirlwind of self-imposed pressures and comparisons. Another hallmark of end-of-year melancholy is the difficulty in feeling gratitude. Even when there are achievements to be celebrated, the feeling of "it wasn't enough" overshadows the victories. Even after achieving important things, the thought "I could have done more" lingers. This dissatisfaction, which often has no rational basis, is linked to the way people deal with their expectations. Nostalgia also plays an important role. At the end of the year, memories from other times come back in full force. This happens because year-end celebrations are filled with symbols that evoke the past. The Christmas music that played during childhood, the smell of a special dish that a family member used to prepare, the memory of people who are no longer present. All of these serve as emotional triggers. Many people find themselves overwhelmed by a longing that doesn't have a specific name, a longing for times that have passed and will never return. This melancholy, however, doesn't always present itself in an obvious way. Sometimes, it hides behind behaviors that seem normal. You know when someone suddenly steps away from the group during dinner and stays silent, staring into space, or when someone prefers to stay on their phone while everyone else is talking. This could be a sign of melancholy. Often, silence is the way we deal with things we don't know how to explain. The feeling of inadequacy is also common. No matter how many goals have been achieved, the thought, "I'm not enough," creeps in as an intrusive idea. This feeling, which may be rooted in deeper personal issues, intensifies at the end of the year because, during this time, we are constantly exposed to comparisons. When we see others celebrating weddings, promotions, and trips on social media, it's natural for comparison to make us feel less than. Another sign that melancholy is present is excessive reflection. Many people start to review every choice they made throughout the year. The thought, "What if I had done things differently?" echoes like a mental loop that doesn't go away. In this reflection, past decisions become the center of attention, and the regret of not having made different choices turns into an emotional burden. End-of-year melancholy, therefore, is not just visible sadness. It manifests silently, often disguised as isolation, self-criticism, nostalgia, or even in the difficulty of enjoying small moments of joy. Recognizing these signs is the first step to dealing with them in a healthier and more conscious way. Dealing with end-of-year melancholy isn't about eliminating it, but about learning to live with it more lightly. Often, what bothers us the most is not the feeling itself, but our attempt to push it away at all costs. And, as Jung warned, what you resist persists. In other words, the more we try to deny or run from this melancholy, the stronger it becomes. The first step is to accept that melancholy is part of the human experience. It's not a weakness or a flaw that needs to be fixed as the year draws to a close. Memories, regrets, and reflections naturally come to the surface. This isn't a mistake, but a natural process of closing a cycle. Therefore, instead of forcing yourself to feel fine, the invitation is to welcome whatever feelings arise. This may seem simple, but many people resist because they believe they shouldn't feel this way. That kind of self-pressure only makes the feeling heavier. Another important point is recognizing the lessons learned. Many people look back on the past year with a focus solely on their failures and unmet goals. This creates the impression that nothing went right, even when that isn't true. To break out of this cycle, it can be helpful to do a practical exercise. List 3 things you did during the year that you once thought you wouldn't be able to do. They don't have to be big achievements. It could be something simple, like having a difficult conversation, overcoming a challenge at work, or maintaining mental well-being in the face of adversity. Recognizing these small victories helps balance the perception of inadequacy that often arises at the end of the year. For those who feel the weight of memories and lost time, it can be helpful to create a moment of intentional reflection. This doesn't have to be a formal ritual, but rather a conscious pause to look at the year with kindness. Unlike the automatic mental review we usually do, this pause allows us to observe our experiences without judgment. It's not about listing failures, but about recognizing what is still unresolved. This practice helps us understand that the end of the year is not a final deadline, but simply a transition from one stage to the next. The goals that were left unfinished can carry over into the new year, and don't have to be seen as failed missions. Another important aspect is to be mindful of comparisons. At the end of the year, we are bombarded with photos and videos of other people's achievements on social media, people celebrating weddings, job promotions, and international trips. This can create the false impression that everyone is doing well except for me. But what we don't see on social media are the struggles, doubts, and bad days. What we see is just the showcase, not the stockroom. In this sense, being mindful of your social media consumption at the end of the year can be an act of self-care. It might be a good time to reduce your time online and focus on what's within your reach, rather than on what others are showing. If feelings of emptiness or disconnection arise in the middle of the festivities, don't judge yourself. This is more common than it seems. Many people, even when surrounded by friends and family, feel out of sync, as if they're on a different frequency. This could be a sign that the body and mind need a moment of retreat. In such cases, allowing yourself to take a break, step outside to breathe, find a quieter space, or be alone for a few minutes can be a good option. Sometimes, the simple act of respecting this need can already bring a sense of relief. Finally, remember that the new year doesn't have to begin with the pressure for a total transformation. There's no need to become a whole new person in January. The goals that weren't achieved can be adjusted, reviewed, and carried forward. The feeling of mission accomplished doesn't necessarily come from checking off every goal, but from the awareness that you did the best you could with the resources and conditions you had at the time. Dealing with end-of-year melancholy is not about defeating the feeling, but about learning to move forward with it, without letting it paralyze you. End-of-year melancholy is not a mistake or a personal flaw. It's a natural part of the cycle of closure. Every end of a cycle invites us to look back, review the journey, and confront what was left unfinished. This explains why, while some people are celebrating, others are reflecting, it's not a matter of right or wrong. It's just different ways of experiencing the same moment. Carl Jung showed us that the shadow, that part of ourselves we avoid all year long, reveals itself at the end of the cycle. It's when the masks fall and the postponed truths come to light. But the shadow doesn't appear to punish us. It shows up to reveal what still needs to be embraced. It's not a sentence, but an opportunity for integration. The promises we didn't keep, the desires we set aside, and the failures we preferred not to see throughout the year now ask to be acknowledged. Freud teaches us that every end of a cycle involves mourning. It's not just the year that ends, but also the possibilities that were left behind. We don't only grieve the people who left, but also the versions of ourselves that didn't come to be. That's why the end of the year carries symbolic mourning, a farewell to what won't come back. It's normal to feel nostalgia for moments that have passed or for people who are no longer by our side. It's normal to feel the weight of time. So, What can we take from all of this? That melancholy is not the end of anything. On the contrary, it's a sign that something new is on the way. It's not about overcoming melancholy, but about understanding it as part of the process. If there's one common thread between Jung and Freud's ideas, it's that what we avoid comes back stronger, and what we don't accept turns into a burden when we embrace our own story, with its failures, its victories, and even its unfinished promises. The year doesn't have to end with the feeling of, I could have done more. It ends with the certainty that we did the best we could with the resources we had. As you step into the new year, there doesn't have to be pressure for a total renewal. You don't have to reinvent yourself or create an endless list of goals. Sometimes what you need isn't more goals, but more compassion for yourself. It's not about changing everything, but about continuing, even if imperfectly. I believe in you. I'm rooting for you. I'm grateful for your life, and I'm so happy that you exist. I need you to keep being this incredible person who is doing their best to make everything work out, even on the days when it feels like nothing is happening. Don't underestimate how far you've already come. Look at everything you've faced, and you'll see that the person you are today wouldn't exist without each and every one of those moments. Which part of yourself needs to be accepted for next year to be different? Maybe it's accepting that not everything will be finished, that some promises will remain in progress, and that's okay. Maybe it's time to realize that the value of a year is not measured by grand achievements, but by how we make it through the hardest days. The next year doesn't have to be a perfect year. It just needs to be yours.